Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain. The recent escalations between America and Russia could lead to World War III. What are the reasons behind the escalation? And also, in the midst of all this, we see new friendships emerging and old ones swaying away. What's in store for the new friendship of Russia and Pakistan? To discuss this topic, we have with us today Peter Lavelle, a senior Russian journalist and also the presenter of Crosstalk on RT. Welcome to our show, Peter Lavelle. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
It's good to be with you, as always.
Peter, correct me if I'm wrong. The recent escalation between America and Russia arose when both countries could not reach an understanding in the recent UN joint session. Which part couldn't the both countries agree upon regarding Syria?
Well, it's very interesting because the ceasefire agreement that was agreed to by the United States and Russia, the Americans did not want to be released public. Which is rather strange because the French had seen it. They said they should be released. Obviously, the Syrians had seen it. The Iranians had seen it, and a few other parties, and they all thought it should be made public, but the Americans didn't. And when it became partially public, we all know why. It is because the Americans made promises that they never intended to keep to pull away their so-called moderates from these horrific terrorist groups, and they're all terrorists, okay, of one degree or another. This moderate phrase is an invention of Western media. They don't exist. And so they could not get their proxies on the ground to separate. They continued to commit violations of the ceasefire, retooling, regrouping, rearming, moving location, and then Ashton Carter of the Pentagon, he told his commander-in-chief, I mean, in a way that he should have been fired. It was insurrection on the part of the state of the Pentagon, and of course they were killing up to 82 Syrian soldiers that were fighting ISIS. And so, obviously, the Russians see that the Americans have no good faith whatsoever. And even any person of just common sense, if you look at how the events unfolded here, I mean, the Americans just couldn't keep their word, and then they had to turn around and blame it on the Russians. And so, the Russians, I have to really admire Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. I have to sit through all those meetings with John Kerry and really know in the back of your mind that he's not serious. And we know now that was one of the hawks, that he even said to a group of diplomats at the United Nations building that, he had all along wanted regime change. I'm paraphrasing right now. He wanted to use force. I mean, again, America's top diplomat is speaking this way. I mean, you can forgive the hysterics of Samantha Power. I guess that's what she's supposed to be, is a hysterical woman in public. I mean, she embarrasses herself and the U.S. But to answer your question succinctly, it was the Americans that didn't want to keep their word because they knew they couldn't keep their word. They can't control these proxies on the ground. And the Russians have leverage but not complete control over the Assad government. The Assad government knows that it's to their advantage to working with the Russians. And I'm sure that President Assad, he told the Russians, look, you see, this is the kind of people we're dealing with. They're not serious.
Peter, what is Russia's narrative? What is their basic line of argument regarding Syria?
Well, fundamentally, and again, this is something that Western audiences have forgotten, or mostly because they haven't been told, is that Russia saw what happened with Iraq, what's still happening in Afghanistan, Libya. And these are all gross violations of countries' sovereignty. And then when you grossly violate the sovereignties of these countries with the use of force, you break these states. They become failed states. Then you have refugee flows. They're not going to North America, my friend. No, they're going to other places much closer to the Middle East, and that's Europe. And Russia has its own soft underbelly, I can use an old-fashioned term, where there are these Wahhabist infiltrators into the southern part of Russia that are causing trouble, and Russia is looking forward, saying we have to snuff this out where it is because it tends to expand. And Russia's narrative is that the Americans, very cynically, are using these terrorist groups. We saw the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the late 70s, early 80s, and they're just being replicated all over the place right now. The Americans foolishly and naively, cynically believe they can control these groups. When have they ever been under control? When the Americans say, "Oh, we won, we got our flag over this foreign capital," and then they walk away, and then these black flags are still there. And they're motivated, and they will continue to exist. And the Russians say, no, we went to Syria to help a sovereign government to destroy terrorist groups. First and foremost, the Russians reached out the hand to the Americans. Let's do this together. Let's get rid of ISIS, Daesh, al-Nusra. Let's do it together. And then we can go to the second phase of some kind of political transition, hopefully a democratic transition for the people of Syria. And the Russian narrative is so simple, so straightforward. The Western narrative, it trips all over itself. It can't explain with a straight face what it's trying to do. Because when you look at Western media, they talk about rebel groups. They never like to name people. And these groups are listed as terrorist groups by the United Nations and other conventions around the world. And the Americans won't be honest about that. They are supporting terrorism in Syria, and they're supporting foreign proxies from other countries, but primarily have a Wahhabi-like ideology. And this is at the fault of the Americans. The Russians have only tried to help.
Peter, what is the solution to the recent escalation which could lead to World War III?
Well, really, the Americans have to stop with the loose rhetoric. The Pentagon sabotaged that ceasefire in a major way. It was going to be difficult to work out even if that hadn't happened. But there is no alternative to a diplomatic solution here. Or we can just have an escalating war. Now, I have to ask the people in Washington, is that what you really want? I think some do, all right? They think this is a time that they can bloody Russia, they can embarrass Russia, they can embarrass Russia on the international stage, they can embarrass Putin, because the Russians are there under certain circumstances. I tell my friends, and sometimes they're upset when I tell them, I said, Russia is going to do it the best it can, but it's not going to fight a third world war with the United States. Over Syria. It's not that close of a national interest to Russia. It's a principled interest right now. And they don't want refugee flows going up north and towards Russia. But, we could see a situation where we see an escalation. The Russians will respond. And it will be in a way that the Americans will be outraged. And then the Americans are going to have to decide, at what price do they want to win this? What price do they want to pay for a failed state? Because there's a lot of very high-tech material the Russians have in Syria, and Russia is very close by. It may even use Iranian airfields. The Americans could lose ships. They're going to lose people. It could be a really catastrophic mess. And then we go into that Dr. Strangelove scenario of escalation. I hope nobody wants to go there, though we could go just below that radar. That would still be a tragedy.
In the midst of all this, Russia and Pakistan held joint military exercises for the very first time. Do you see this as a sign of a better relationship between Russia and Pakistan?
Of course, and why not? Pakistan has to look for reliable partners, and if it can diversify its diplomatic portfolio, good for Pakistan. Any rational country is going to do that out of national interest. Russia is doing exactly the same way. They're saying to the Pakistanis, "You want to work with us? Okay, then we can work with you. Let's see what we can find of mutual benefit." That's how great countries work. In the 21st century, the West says that we shouldn't be thinking about spheres of influence and these kinds of things. Of course we should, because the West sees the whole world as its sphere of influence. That's why they don't like this terminology. So if Russia and Pakistan can improve its relationship, good. And that's good for both countries, and it's good for security in the region. And of course, it's a signal to the Indians.
Peter, last question. Pakistan also in the recent past has signed a historic gas pipeline deal with Russia, and recently has been interested in Russia's air defense system and also Sukhoi 35 fighter jets. When these deals are completed, can we envision a bright future in the relationship of Pakistan and Russia?
Well, I certainly hope so, but let's not forget a lot of this is being pointed at Washington, and the Pakistanis are saying, we can parlay. We got friends in the world. We even have friends that you don't like, Russia. Okay, so this is also a gambit that they're reminding the Americans that they should treat Pakistan with a lot more respect and treat it as a partner and not a pawn on the chessboard. So the Pakistanis are acting very wisely and pragmatically, I would say, because the Pakistanis have to think about what's going on in the South China Sea and India's recent embrace of the U.S. and getting closer and closer militarily. So, Pakistan lives in a complicated neighborhood and it has to deal appropriately.
Thank you so much, Peter Lavelle, for being on Tactical Talk. It's always a pleasure having you.
It's always a pleasure. You have great questions and I enjoy answering.
This was Peter Lavelle, a senior Russian journalist and also the host of Crosstalk. We were discussing the recent US and Russia escalations regarding Syria and also the future of Pakistan-Russia relations. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain. Take care and goodbye.